Hello, I'm Jennifer McRorie. I'm the Director Curator at the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery. And I'm pleased to have you all join us tonight for a dialogue with Saskatchewan artist Audrey Dreaver to discuss her work, which is currently being featured in the touring exhibition, I Do Not Have My Words. And it's being presented alongside the work of Joi, Arcand, and Catherine Blackburn. The exhibition, which is touring the province through OSAC, it was organized by the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery, and it's being co-presented by the Moose Jaw Cultural Centre, where it's currently on display in their mosaic gallery. We have Derek Cronin here, the Executive Director of the Moose Jaw Cultural Centre. Derek, if you want to give a wave. And so it's a pleasure to partner once again with the Cultural Centre and share in some community programming. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery is situated on what is now known as Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan on Treaty 4 territory, which is the traditional lands of the Blackfoot, Cree, Saulteaux, Ojibwe, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on all territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we're committed to move forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I'd also like to acknowledge our funders for their support. They are the City of Moose Jaw, Sask Arts, Canada Council for the Arts, SaskCulture, Saskatchewan Lotteries, Canadian Heritage, and the Government of Canada. Although we're going to be approaching this as an interview with Audrey Dreaver, I invite you all to feel free to participate in the discussion by adding comments or asking questions throughout the discussion and adding them to the chat bar. So to start off, I'll introduce our guest artist, Audrey Dreaver. Audrey is Nehiyawak Plains Cree and grew up in Prince Albert. Her family comes from Mishawasas and Atataku Cree Nations of Saskatchewan. She received her MFA in painting from the University of Regina in 2015 and her BFA in painting, printmaking, and small metal sculpture, and her BA in Museum Studies and Curating and Native Art History from IAIA, the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Since returning to Canada in 2008, she's worked as an independent curator, a consultant, and art instructor. She's currently a lecturer and program coordinator for Indigenous Communications and Fine Arts Department at the First Nations University of Canada. So the exhibition, I Do Not Have My Words, which features prints by Audrey. It also features photography, sculpture, and beaded mixed media works by Joi, Arcand, Catherine Blackburn, as well as Audrey. Each artist's works explores Indigenous language loss and the interruption of intergenerational language learning within their own families, and considers how language is connected to one's cultural identity. Audrey, I'm wondering if you could talk about the origins of the work in the exhibition and how it evolved out of the research that you did for your MFA program at the University of Regina, where you were investigating how your family came to lose your language.
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me to participate in this and for including my work in the exhibit. I appreciate the support of the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery, as well as OSAC and the different galleries and museum spaces that the exhibit is touring to. So thank you very much for that support. So the work became, it manifested into, from my exploration of the loss of our language in our immediate family, because where myself and my siblings were not taught to speak Cree, but my parents were fluent in Cree and spoke Cree all of the time. So when I was deciding what to do as an exploration in my MFA, the particular topic of language loss came up in a couple of different ways, and it was kind of based on, it ended up being based on a situation I had where a friend of mine was, whose mother was having some issues with short-term memory loss, kept bringing this question up to me. Do you speak Cree? Do you speak Cree? And so, you know, I was thinking about several possible topics to explore. And because that situation was just right there happening every day when I was in the house, I decided that that was the one that I would work on. And so, you know, the exploration of it being as personal as it was, started with looking at myself and my own history and how that simple question, 4 little words, do you speak Cree, how it impacted me and how it made me feel comfortable or uncomfortable, connected and disconnected at the same time. And, you know, how that impacted our family as a whole. So that's where it started from.
Right. So you had said that like working on your MFA, working on like exploring that, you actually, you had some conversations with your family to find out why, because you, as you said, your parents spoke Cree and were fluent in it, and why there was that discontinuation in your family. Can you share about what the I guess why that stopped in your family, why your parents decided not to teach you Cree?
Sure. So as I was working through, you know, a plan, I guess, to kind of narrow down what I would focus on, because the whole concept of language loss as a nation is one huge topic, but individually it's just as large and complex. And so I've been trying to work on learning Cree for over 20 years. At that point, it had been 20 years. And I still wasn't able to speak the language, but I had witnessed my oldest sister understanding and being able to interact with the old ladies from that would come to visit us from Mistawasis and Atakaku. But she couldn't speak to them. She would understand them, listen, understand them, and answer them, but only in English. And it didn't make sense to me. And so as I was starting this exploration, I was talking to my family members, my sisters, and my own kids, my daughter and my sons, some of my cousins. I was speaking with them, looking at where we were situated, was because I didn't really know if any of them had ever tried to learn Cree, or I'd never spoken about the issue with them. And so I found that when I'm looking at something from that personal perspective, you have to look at yourself, which isn't always easy. You have to look at your own self, your own experience, and what you have gone through in your life that directly or indirectly connects to the topic that you're exploring. And I've done I'd say over half of the work that I've done in my time as a painter and artist who works in metals or mixed media. I'd say over 50% of the time, the topic is based on my experience. And I try to create something that I know I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that has experienced this. So I try to create artworks that others can relate to, that speaks to others, while at the same time really working from that personal perspective and not necessarily intending for work to be exhibited. So that exploration is an important component of the work that I do. And in this case, I started talking with my mother had already passed away, so I couldn't speak anymore with her, but I remembered our conversations that we had over the years. And I went to my sisters and my kids, and we talked about, I talked a little bit with my brother. I have one brother. And we talked about their experiences, whether or not they had ever asked our parents, why didn't you speak Cree to us? Why didn't you teach us? And none of us understood why. What was the reason? And why did we end up in this situation where both parents were absolutely fluent in Cree and they only spoke Cree pretty much to each other? Very seldom did they speak English to each other. All of our aunts and uncles were fluent in Cree. And so whenever anybody would get together, they would speak to each other in Cree. But then when everyone spoke to their kids, they used English, only English. So some things didn't make sense. And of course, I remember going through elementary school and the little bit of stuff that I learned about Native people who were referred to as Indians at the time was not flattering. And it was kind of reinforcing that stereotype that Native people quit doing things because they wanted to become white. They quit doing things because they were embarrassed and ashamed of who they were. And that didn't make any sense at all because my parents didn't seem ashamed in any way, shape, or form. They spoke Cree to each other everywhere they went, including in the stores and, in the doctor's offices, wherever they were together, they would speak Cree. And I noticed that they laughed a lot more. They were laughing a lot more when they were speaking the other language than they did when they were speaking English. So whatever they were talking about, they found a way to include humor, which is something that we do to get through tough, difficult things. Not that we're laughing at the situation, but we'll find little points that can make us smile even though we're struggling to get through something difficult. But even so, we were not wealthy, so they struggled with 7 kids, and we always had other extended family members staying with us. So, putting food on the table for that many was not easy. They struggled, we were poor. But they also had, they had a very strong commitment to our family, and they made sure that we had everything. So all this while they would speak Cree to each other. When they'd argue in Cree. When they laughed in Cree. So it didn't make sense to me that we didn't get that. Why didn't we learn that? And right from grade 5 was the first time that I remember noticing being treated a different way by other kids because I couldn't speak Cree and everyone assumed that I could. And that's probably where my questions about why don't we speak Cree started to really formulate. And talking with my sisters and my brother, my nieces and nephews, I spoke with some of them, and my own kids. I looked at, that family exploration and how important it is to dig into what the history, to find out what happened, to really take a look at whatever it was that took place. And that's kind of been a process that I use for most of my artwork, but even in life, trying to, if I find myself caught in this never-ending cycle that isn't healthy, dealing with self-esteem issues that won't go away, then I'll dig deep and look into where did this come from. So that research becomes really important. And the family comments were consistently that they had asked my mother, our mother, their grandmother, and their aunt, even my cousins, asked my parents, and especially my mom, why didn't you teach us Cree? And their answer was consistently that they didn't think we wanted to learn because we lived in the city, we didn't live on the reserve, it wasn't needed. We went to school. It was all English speaking, so it wasn't necessary. And we accepted that. I just assumed that was what the reason was and never thought about it again. But then I remembered when I was doing this exploration, and I thought about how many times I'd been asked this in my life and what a burden it would be at times when I knew that I was being judged and ostracized and shunned. I was shunned by people because I didn't speak Cree. And so, I was looking at all of that stuff and how this one simple little story that my mom shared with me changed all of that. And I thought about it for about a year after the conversation, and then I didn't think about it again until I did this exploration. And I asked my siblings if they had heard that story, and none of them had. And that story was about my oldest sister going to school for the first time, Prince Albert. She was 5 years old when she started, and she was fluent in Cree and English. She also was excited to go to school, and she was speaking Cree with a couple of other little kids trying to understand the teacher, and they were trying to help each other, so they were speaking Cree to each other to try and understand what she wanted, what she was talking about, and they were all sent to the principal's office and strapped. And at that point, my parents had to come to terms with a couple of things. One of them was that they had no control over their own child's discipline when that child was in the school. They couldn't intervene for their child, and they couldn't protect their child because they weren't allowed to sit in the school or tell the principal whether or not the principal had the right to strap or punish them in any way. And it was traumatic for her, and it was traumatic for them. And so they decided that night, after a long conversation, that they would quit speaking Cree to their daughter and to any kids they had after that. So they did. They quit speaking Cree to her and only spoke to her in English, so that when she went to school, she wouldn't slip into Cree and get strapped again. And so by the time I came along, 5 kids later, I'm the second youngest of 7 kids, they were fully committed to only speaking English to their kids. And I had never heard that story. I'd never heard any of them speaking about that particular incident and what happened. So, hearing her and watching her tell that story was really painful. And I felt like she felt like they had lost out on something, giving us something. So from that point, I took that story and I asked my siblings, like I said, if they had heard it, and they hadn't. So I told them what she had said, and then it made sense, right? They understood. And it started to take away some of the tension that we felt, because I think all of us at some point in time were a little angry that we hadn't been taught, or maybe a lot angry. I don't know how everyone felt about it, but that we hadn't been taught, that we'd missed out on something, and that they didn't give us something they were supposed to give us. So, not happy with them. And, so when we heard that story, each of us, when I heard it first, and then when I recounted it to them, it alleviated that sense of, why didn't they give it to us? It took away that feeling that we had been robbed of something. They deliberately didn't teach us Cree because they probably were ashamed. They probably didn't want to be Native. And it just removed it all because we knew the truth. And the truth was that they were being Cree parents who took care of their children and did everything they could to keep their kids safe. And that was, if that meant not speaking Cree to their children, then that's the choice they made. And it's a sad choice. And I wish that they had been able to, continue on with their bilingual language training, which they clearly wanted to do, because my sister was fluent in both languages at age 5. Things would have been different, and I wouldn't have had to create this work, right? So I have that being able to talk to especially my siblings about how they felt, and realizing that they had the same questions I had all these years made me feel a little more connected and closer to them as well. So all things combined, I think it brought our family together a little stronger.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That you could work through questions you had yourself and answer questions within your family. I just thought I'd just mention for participants that the images that have been scrolling are from Audrey's show that she had at the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery back in 2017, and it was based on the work that she created as part of her MFA, and the exhibit was called "No, I Do Not Speak Cree," and so we just thought we would run this while you were talking about, you know, as you were working through this body of work. So Audrey, we're not actually featuring some of your paintings in the exhibit I Do Not Have My Words, which is the touring exhibition that's touring with OSAC. We have 3 series of prints of yours. So I was wondering if you could talk about the works No, If, and So, and why you chose to work solely with text in those pieces.
Sure. First of all, I love text in art, but I've never been very good at it. So it was a risk. I took a risk. And I knew that I wanted something in there that was outside of the paintings. And I had been working on some larger scale sculpture, like full-size body sculpture pieces, but they didn't work out. So I didn't want to put them into the exhibit and create unnecessary I don't want to say, they just didn't fit. so it ended up being the paintings and the prints. But I had all of these. This whole exploration reminded me of the things that I've gone through in my life. So I was in grade 5, which is what, 11 years old, 10 or 11 years old, when I first was experiencing issues that could be connected to racism or exclusion. I was excluded by the kids who were from the residential school because I didn't live on the reserve and I didn't speak Cree. Because there were kids that came from the PA residence to the school that we were at. And I was excluded from, throughout my life, from spaces where they were only speaking Cree, or expectations were that people could speak Cree in various ways. And so as I was exploring this and I was thinking, well, what am I going to do paintings of? What are the topics going to be of each of the paintings? And I started making a list of all these things that I had experienced and the questions that I had, or the comments that I felt I should say, but because I'm shy, I didn't say. So I started listing them, and I was thinking, I got to put these in here somehow. Somehow they have to fit in here. And in the end, what I did was I took them and I just typed them. I typed them all, everything that I could think of, and I grouped them into, they kind of naturally grouped into these 3 things. No, I do not speak Cree. If I could speak Cree, and so what if I don't speak Cree? They kind of naturally grouped into those 3. And so I took those sentences and I created this text piece, and no, so, and if became really prominent in that piece, that set. And what those are all my statements, or not all of them, some of them. And you can see like each set, each row has, these short sentences or questions or comments. So it's not just like a few words randomly placed. They're all the questions, the comments, and the thoughts that I had about my inability to speak Cree. What if I could speak Cree? Well, I could do this and I could do this, and And so what if I don't speak Cree? What's it to you? Does it make me less Cree? Does it make you more Cree? Things like that. And so what it became was a bunch of things that I did not have time, or I didn't have the capacity, or I didn't have the energy to create a painting for each piece, for each statement, because all of the pieces that I created are a statement like that, some from that experience. So that text became really important then, because it was asking the questions and making the comments and providing the thoughts that I had. And as people would read them, even people that were from other cultures but couldn't speak their language were connecting to it, because they were the same kind of questions that people were having from, you know, other nations as well, not just the Cree Nation. So it became meaningful because it was all those things that go through a person's mind when they're asked if they can speak their mother tongue and they can't. These became actually some of my favorite work in the whole exhibit. And I think this is the first time that I can honestly say I was successful in doing a text piece of art. So I'm really proud of these pieces. But what's most important to me about these is that they're those phrases, those words that other people can relate to, they can connect to. And I've had so many people contact me about these particular pieces, and how when they were reading it, they were reading through it. And I didn't know if anybody would stop and read it, because it's a lot of reading. But they said that they read through everything, and there were so many statements and questions that I put in my list on these sheets, on these images, that they exactly had too. So it helped me to feel like I was helping them, because then they always said that they were grateful that somebody else was saying what they were experiencing too. So, you know, my work is, if I have to show my work, I'm hoping that it will help others who are going through the same experiences that I have, or I am going through, so that they don't feel like they're alone. Because often you do. You feel isolated, and you feel like, well, I'm the only person in the world who doesn't speak Cree. You know, I'm the only person in the world going through this, and you're not. So that was how these came to be. What it ended up being was those statements that, you know, I just didn't have time or the energy to create a piece for. And, you know, some of these pieces look really simple. They're just basic silhouettes with a very light pastel-y background. But each of them took me a while to figure out how to create that, that narrative that conveyed what I wanted to say without having to put a whole bunch of stuff in. You know, it's just like it's very specific. And so when you asked about this being in the exhibit, this piece has been purchased by the Mann Gallery, I believe, and I like the idea of this work, especially this particular set of pieces, touring, because I know that there are a lot of people who haven't learned their language and feel the way I feel. You know, if I could speak Cree, I could help all my students who want to put Cree in their artwork, which I can't do because I don't know the language, I don't know the syllabics. I have to connect them to a language teacher, language speaker. If I could speak Cree, you know, I could tell my kids jokes in Cree. And we, you know, maybe laugh like mom and dad did.
Right.
You know, things like that, right? I could teach my grandkids the language that I should have learned. So, yeah, it's been it's tough when you're doing a personal exploration. It's tough to look at those points that were, you know were unfair, that you know should have been different or could have been different, and you don't understand what happened. It's tough looking at that.
Right, right. You mentioned Audrey working with the silhouette. So there's two other series of prints. There's No More English Here and Poof. And so you're using the silhouettes in these two other series. I just wanted to talk or ask you why you decided to use the silhouette. You and I have talked about this before, and they're such a powerful image. They're quiet, but they're powerful.
Yeah, the silhouette became really important because of that desire of mine to connect it to more than just me. I like work that transcends being about just one person or one thing. I like when work can relate to other people can relate to it and see themselves in that experience. And the silhouette, when I first started the MFA work, I actually started with my one piece. It was a diptych. It was a large size diptych. And the silhouette was, I didn't do a silhouette. I did my figure and I was painting in my facial features. And it just didn't feel right. And I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong that wasn't what I wanted. So what I did was I graded out. I just painted gray. I painted out my facial features and the clothing and stuff, the detail that I was putting in. I just painted gray over top of it. And then I went for lunch because my head hurt. I was overthinking things and I couldn't get what I wanted. I couldn't figure out what it was I was looking for. And when I came back and I came around the corner and I saw that silhouette, it just looked like it fit perfectly. So that's when I decided to try it. I wasn't sure if it's going to work, but I thought I'm not the only one who's gone through this, and I want people to relate to it. I don't want them to see it being Audrey's story of language loss. I wanted to, if it was their story, they could put themselves in those situations. But it was still me. It was still it's based on my own experience. So I used the silhouette without any details instead of the detailed figure. And it worked. It worked in the large scale pieces. It worked in the exhibit as a whole, my MFA exhibit. And I did this set of prints that was, I actually did 2 sets of prints. One was a positive experience with a cultural person, Cree speaker, being encouraging. And then the other one was negative. It was really negative and kind of traumatic. And I wanted to counter that because we get both. We get a lot of nasty stuff, but we also get a lot of support from different people. And so you find a balance, right, of where to turn if you're able to connect with someone who can help you in that way and be supportive, then you connect with them, and it's a good thing. So that silhouette became really important as a means for me to show myself because it was my experience, but not show me personally, specifically in detail, so that other people could insert themselves in those same situations.
Right.
It worked really well. So I was happy with that. These prints that you're looking at here, this particular silhouette was connected to so many times I was in spaces where we were doing ceremonial stuff and sitting there waiting patiently, sometimes nervous, sometimes I was fearful of how I'd be treated, and I tried to just be, strong and just sit there without showing my fear. Sometimes I felt like I was just relaxed and I was enjoying the smell of the medicines and the sound of the kids and their families talking and playing, and the sound of the drums as they were being warmed up, and so you could take this pose and it could be one of any emotions. So it became it's based on a large scale painting, but this particular figure became quite prominent in what it was that I was trying to say, and how you can see this figure and it can be one thing that's really comforting and supportive, or it can be something that's really negative and uncomfortable.
So can you tell us, are you willing to share the story, the story of this series?
Yeah. So this, is this the poof one?
This is no more English
No more
here.
English, okay.
Yeah.
So there were two instances I had at a ceremony, and I did large size prints of these pieces, and they took up, 24 feet of wall space. They were large, they were individually framed, and they took up a lot of space. And I liked the size of them, but at the same time, I didn't like how much space they took up. But that space, when you take up a space in a gallery with important information, that like important work that you think is telling an important story, it feels good to have that space, right? To occupy that space. But at the same time, it was large, and you had to stand back and you had to go through them. It was, 24 feet of images just to get one story. And so I thought if I tried it on a small scale, I could do these prints close together with less of a space need. So these two experiences, one was really bad and one was really good. The first one was no more English here. And that was at a feast that I went to. It happened at a feast. And I was in there, I went in there, I wasn't feeling very good. I was just having a real hard time and didn't feel confident. I didn't feel like my self-esteem was really low. So I went through and I had this, I just felt I had this need to go someplace where they would be burning the sage or sweetgrass or, a smudge. And then people would be singing and gathering together. So I went to this feast at one of the schools and I sat down. I wasn't feeling very good. So I went in there. The first frame is that figure that's not quite complete. It's got voids. It's not solid. And that was representing me in that place where I wasn't feeling good about myself, struggling to get through, feed my kid, things like that. And as I was sitting there and I was, getting comfortable and I was smelling that smudge and could hear the drums warming up and the people talking and people coming in and picking up space and visiting and it felt good. So I was feeling better and better. And then this voice started. One of the men who was there was, sometimes people will tell stories or give you advice or, share experiences to help us connect before the pipe ceremony starts. And this person was, I guess, trying to do that. But what he did was he went into kind of a rant about how he was sick of hearing only English at ceremony spaces. You need to speak your language. You need to speak Cree in here. So he told us over the course of about 10 minutes with a very angry voice that no more English here. I'm not accepting English here. You can't pray in English here. It's not allowed. We want Cree. You pray in your own language. You pray in Cree. And so as he was talking, no more English here was the first thing I heard. And I thought, that's all I speak is English. How can I not pray in English? I don't know what to do. And then pray in your own language. Well, my language is Cree and I don't speak it. So how can I pray in my language? So I felt a little worse. And then he just kept on going and going until to the point where I felt myself, I realized that my body, I had slouched over and my body was really tight and tense and I was feeling ashamed and feeling especially like I didn't belong in this ceremony space. And that was, that really broke my heart because they had been talking about how welcoming everybody and we love you all and this is a safe place for you. And then this rant came from this person's anger, whatever he was experiencing, and he imposed it on us. And so at that point, when I realized my body was like that and I started questioning, well, what right does he have to say how I pray? What right does anybody have to say what language I pray in? If, somebody's saying you pray in Cree or you pray in whatever, or Creator, God won't hear your prayers. That's like the Roman Catholic Church saying, if you don't pray in Latin, God won't hear your prayers. So I was getting really upset. And as I was getting upset, I found myself sitting up straighter and straighter. And I thought, I'm not doing this. I guess if you can't if we can't pray in our own language, then we're not welcome here. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I have to go home then. And I stood up to get my blankets and leave. And that was the first time I looked up, and around the room, people were all over, were getting up and leaving. They were angry, they were hurt. Some people were crying because they were so disappointed. They were getting their kids and they were walking out. And the elders, the pipe carriers, saw what was going on, but they didn't stop the guy from continuing on. And he was still talking in that manner when I walked out of the building. So that was one really negative, kind of traumatic experience with not having my language. The opposite was at a fasting camp that I went to. I was fasting and I was in my lodge by myself, and there's certain things that you have to pay attention to in regard to protocols when you're doing ceremonies like that. And one of them is you don't talk to people, you don't visit with people, you're in isolation, you're solitary. And even if somebody's lodge is 5 feet away from yours, you don't interact with them because you're there praying, you're focusing. And so I was taught that, you don't talk to anybody. And then all of a sudden I was sitting there and I was thinking about food, which I shouldn't have been thinking about. I was so hungry. All I could think about was what I was going to eat. And all of a sudden there was this voice calling me, Newsom, Newsom. It was this old lady that was in the camp. And it startled me because you're not supposed to talk to anybody. And the elders tell you don't talk to anybody. But then this elder was there breaking their own rules and talking to me. I didn't know if I was supposed to answer her. So she kept talking, calling me until I answered. And she said, what are you thinking about? And I said, I'm praying in a sacred manner, because it's like I was thinking about food and I didn't want to tell her. And then I thought, oh my God, I lied. I just lied to an elder, and I'm in this ceremony and I lied. Oh my God. I was so embarrassed. So anyway, she said to me, what are you praying for? And I had been praying that earlier that day. I wish I could speak Cree. Can you help me learn to speak Cree? But I wasn't at the moment she arrived. And so I said, I'm praying, asking, for a Creator to wave a hand over top of me, and poof, just like that, I'll be able to speak Cree. And she said, oh my gosh, that's such a good prayer. And did it work? And I said, no, it didn't work. And then it was quiet. She didn't say anything. I thought she had gotten up and left, and about 5 minutes passed, and all of a sudden, Newsom, did it work? It's like, no, it didn't work. And eventually she said, well, maybe you're not being realistic about what you're praying for. It's okay if you don't speak Cree. Creator still hears your prayers. The ancestors still hear your prayers. Doesn't matter what language you pray in, they hear your prayers. You don't have to say them in Cree. And then she urged me on to consider that, to let it go, that I wasn't going to learn to speak Cree that fast. So let it go. And maybe you should focus on something that you can achieve in a quicker period of time. And that's finding a husband, because they all thought I should be married. They all thought I needed a husband. So, this whole process of another ceremony where I was treated the total opposite of the first one that I used as an example. And I've had a lot of experiences, good and bad, like that, in places where people should be welcomed and embraced and supported, instead of, being shunned or ostracized, told to leave. I've been told to leave spaces. And so that whole, that ability to show these two opposite experiences in close proximity to each other has been really important to me. So that's what those are about.
Yeah. Yeah, I enjoy them. They're hung so they face each other, so they're both dialogues are playing out in the space. Yeah.
And it's like the way they're positioned, it's like they're having a dialogue with each other, right? They're having something happen between the two of them, the positive and the negative. And that whole experience of, you know, when you're being supportive to someone, take a look at what your support actually looks like. And I've, from my own experiences in all areas, not just in our cultural spaces, but in life in general, I take a look at how I've been treated, and good and bad, and I try to make sure if it was a bad experience, what happened, and help, you know, my kids and grandkids, my students, to get through stuff. To, you know, you might want to prepare yourself because this might be the what happens. So just get ready, and you know, you'll know how to go get through it when the time comes. And then the positives, I try to pass on those positives. So being supportive and not judging and not shunning, just like accepting and embracing, because we're all struggling. We're all going through all kinds of stuff as we try to reconnect to who we are and why we are sitting where we're sitting, the things that contributed to our life, you know, and not just the negative things. I'm talking about all things, the good things, bad things, because that's life, right? It's a mix and a mess and a whole bunch of things in between.
Right, right. Audrey, I wondered if you could talk about how you've incorporated text into the work through speech balloons as either inner dialogue or intimate conversations. And you did this with the painting series that you started out with, and have continued that with this. And, you know, like especially when you look at here with the 12 images, and the way they're presented like graphic novels, like there's, and even I thought the paintings from your show in No, I Do Not Speak Cree, they were almost like individual cells from a graphic novel that you were presenting. Can you talk a little bit about like why you decided to work
Yeah,
with text that way?
yeah. So this conversation that has been ongoing, sometimes it's with family members, sometimes it's me arguing with myself, debating with myself internally about what the experience is and what I have to do to get through it, or how do I respond? Like, is this where I'm supposed to be? And sometimes it's just thoughts. And how do you present that in a text format in art? And I just kept going to comic book art, graphic novels, and comic book art. I think that comic book artists have an incredible skill to pick out a really important component of the story and use that simple image with a little bit of text to convey what needs to be, like a whole. You can see this one square, one cell of a comic book story that could have one figure in a specific pose, and you know, a small little tiny little bit of even just a symbol like a question mark or a pound mark, and you can read it, you understand what's going on there, and it's more than just this simple man or a simple woman, simple figure. It's telling a story. It's an important component. So I think comic book artists have a real skill at doing that, at picking out the key elements of a story that you're trying to convey in the art. And I believe that all art is a story. It's carrying a story. It's carrying a message, an experience, whatever. And there's even a story of how it came to be, you know, that how that art came to be. And so I just kept getting drawn to comic book art. I just kept thinking speech bubbles, is that the best way to approach this? I didn't know what else to do. And the text is really important. The things that are being said back and forth is important. So I ended up trying the speech bubble kind of approach, and it worked. and I'm happy that I did what I did. I'm quite happy with the pieces. It took a long time to get those pieces in place. And even to settle on the style of the bubble, the text font, all those things that text in art, you know, you have to make these decisions about that I was never good at. And so I looked to Scott McLeod and I read his books on how to make comic book art and what it's all about, and used that as my main resource. And I also read a lot of graphic novels and picked up a lot of graphic novels, anime stuff now. There's all kinds of materials that are out there now that you can pick up and read. And I looked at the placement and the imagery and how even color was used, right? So I decided, okay, I'm gonna go with the speech bubble and I'm fine with that. And then I decided on my sizes and placements for the different types of paintings, different sizes of paintings, even in the prints, what kind of boxes would I use to convey the different emotions. And I liked the way that I used them on that large scale in the larger paintings, but I also really like them in those small prints. And in the small prints, I hand wrote everything. And that was a whole different experience. Going from sharp, clean lettering that was done by a laser printer to doing this hand printing and my handwriting was real messy. Trying to keep it consistent. It's like all these things I had to think about that I didn't realize would be a part of it. But those small, intimate sized cells, and even shown four at a block in a block, brings it even closer to that graphic novel kind of format, comic book format that I was heavily researching. And I think that, you know, on that small, they're great on the large scale. They work as individuals and as a body of work. But my issue with that size is they take up so much space. And then on the small scale, what I like about that is you have to come in close to the pieces to read the text, which then you have a much more intimate experience with that artwork. You're closer, people beside you can't see how you're reacting to the works. So that relationship between the audience, the viewer, and the piece is individual as the people come in and look at the work. And I like that because it is an individual experience if you can relate. And so I think that helps to promote that. Plus, they're so small, you can situate the two experiences, the positive and the negative, in close proximity to each other. And it was always my intent that they would be close together. So you could see, this is one of the negative things that happened to me, but this was also one of the positive things that happened to me in regard to the same issue of not speaking Cree.
Right. Yeah. Just looking at the images here as they're going by again, I remember kind of marveling in this work how you collapse time in these pieces, how you have the past in conversation with the present, and you're having conversations with yourself too. I love the double portraits, and you and I remember when you showed here, we talked about it as sort of like the Frida Kahlo's double portraits that she did as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, I love how you're basically having a conversation with your parents.
Yeah.
Like this work right here.
This piece here, this piece is my resolution piece. This is that image of my parents with my mother holding a baby comes from a photograph of them when my brother was just like a few months old. And I realized we knew that picture our whole life growing up. And then one day I realized that was the age that my sister went to school. That was the age they were when they had to make that decision to not speak Cree to their kids. So it took on a whole other context for me. It changed the way I viewed that piece. And when I was working with that, I did 3 pieces. I did myself looking at this photo on the wall with my mom and dad and my brother in her arms. And then I did another one where they were coming out of the frame. And then the third one was that last one that you showed, where they're standing beside me on either side of me, and my mom is holding the baby. And that is me representing me fully understanding what they did, what they sacrificed for us to be safe. And I think it was a sacrifice because they fully intended to teach their kids both languages. And so it was me understanding the depth of their desire to protect us and keep us safe. And if I had been that parent, I would have done exactly the same that they did to protect my kids. So that piece is my resolution. This is who I am. And then right after that came so what if I don't speak Cree? It does not make me less Cree. And it does not mean that I can't go to cultural things, that I don't know about my language. And in fact, before there was a written form of our language, there was a visual art form. That was our written form, those images of the paintings and the sculptures and the artworks that they did. So I felt like I was speaking Cree in another way through visual art. And that was my resolution piece. The talking with myself, I argue with myself all the time. It's like, you should do that. No, don't go there. Yes, you should do that. No, bad idea. And when I'm making artwork, it's like, oh, you should try that. No, don't do that. No, it's looking good. Just leave it alone. No, really, if I just put this little thing, no, just leave it alone. So I'm just constantly in my head. I'd go to a class and I wasn't sure if it was a Cree class because they were talking about the language in a verb form using Latin terminology like locative and I'd be sitting there like, what the hell does Latin have to do with Cree? Come on, like what is this grammar structure? What does that have to do with Cree? That's not how we talk. It's not how our people talk. So I would question whether or not this was where it was supposed to be. Why were they talking like this? Never mind, just be quiet. And that was what we were always taught. Don't say anything. Never mind, just be quiet. Don't say anything. Don't cause trouble. Don't say anything. And so I would argue in my head instead of asking questions and causing a stir. Because my mother used to say that you always say something. You always say something. So, yeah. But those were fun pieces to do because I was really understanding the power of an image with a photo of my mom and dad and my brother, and also really understanding how much I process stuff myself in my head as I'm going through things. So
you had a shelf in this space attached to the wall, Audrey, right there. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Right there. Yeah. You can see it on the right there. And you had a counter attached, and you asked people to basically add themselves as another number of how many people have lost their language, lost their mother tongue.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why you wanted to include that?
Because I knew there was a lot. I mean, we say that, there's a lot of people that don't have their language, but we always say there's so many of us that don't have our language. There's so many people that don't have their language, but we don't have a specific number. And in my family, as I was doing the work and I was counting with my sister, who was the genealogist in the family, we counted 68 immediate family members, us, me, my siblings, our kids, our grandkids, 68 of us who didn't speak Cree because of the incident that happened to my mom or to my oldest sister. And so when I took that into the critique, I told the faculty that was doing the critique with me, and I gave them that number. That number then becomes it's a statistic, and it becomes meaningful, and it's not just a bunch anymore, it's a specific amount of people, right? And so as I was going through this, I was talking with a lot of artists I know that I'm friends with, many of them non-native, and they'd ask me, how's your work coming along? So I'd tell them, and then I'd tell them about an experience of not speaking Cree, what happened, and then they would tell me a story that was similar of their mothers, fathers, grandparents immigrating to Canada and Saskatchewan, and then also being ostracized because they were speaking their language, which was not English. So Irish people from the Ukraine, from any, even French, anywhere in Europe that wasn't English speaking, they would be ostracized, and the kids would be strapped and sent home with orders to not speak their language, Russian, whatever, German, whatever, in the classroom. And so they became alienated from their language because of the push for English only in schools. And I never thought about the immigrants experiencing that. And I never thought about how this is another indication of how everybody is colonized. Everyone who comes in here, into Canada, who came into Canada and still continues to come into Canada, are expected to be able to speak English, or they'll learn English, because that's the primary language of the country. And even though French is the secondary language, it's still English is what's promoted and pushed. And so it never occurred to me that the immigrants from other countries outside of England would be experiencing the same thing that we were experiencing. And so I started thinking about, well, there's 68 in my family. How many are in your family? And they count back as like 32, 47, 15, whatever number, 4 generations of, and we have big families. So, over 100 don't speak our language. The difference is that in Canada, if we lose our language, it's gone forever. But immigrant settlers with immigrant origin, like European, wherever else in the world they came from, they can go back to their country of origin and pick up their language. But if we lose it, it's gone. That's it. There's no more getting it back. And so it became a point of connecting, but also showing the disparity of the situation. And that also then became important. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to show everyone how we're all colonized. And one of the ways that we've been colonized is we've all been mandated to speak one language, and that's English. So how many of you that have come to this exhibit don't speak your mother tongue? And I'd say so far, 80 to 90% of the people who've viewed this exhibit don't have access to their mother tongue, and from all over the world. So it doesn't matter what nationality you are. If you've been colonized by a British-speaking country, a British country that speaks English, then you're likely, in all likelihood, your family has had some kind of traumatic disconnect to their mother tongue. And then the Germans with the Second World War, after Hitler was defeated, there was the German language was ostracized. And so now kids can't, if they went back to Europe, or if they visit with their, especially in Europe, they go home and they visit with grandparents or relatives over there who don't speak English, just their language of their culture, and the Canadian-born relatives don't speak their mother tongue, they can't communicate. And that actually is happening. So it was having that interactive participation by clicking how many people in your family, adding it to the number, became kind of an important way to connect the viewers and me as the artist telling my story. So it became a really powerful thing, and I was always checking how many, what's the number at? And we had to be careful because when high school groups went through or middle school groups went through, as soon as kids knew that there was something to push, they all pushed it, right? So we had to record the number before they came and after they left.
That's right. We had to do that too. We had to check the numbers all the time.
Yeah, but it was overall it was important. It became an important component about this whole topic. How many people can't speak their mother tongue, and the efforts. You know, they would start talking about the efforts that they made to reconnect to it and whether or not they were able to learn it. You know, stories about the topic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that idea of sort of making people aware of that we're all colonized, you know, in some ways. So, well, thanks, Audrey. I think we're over an hour. Thanks, Audrey, for you know, spending the evening with us. As usual, you're so articulate about your work and yeah, what drives your work. It's always a pleasure to hear you talk about your practice and what's motivating you. And yeah, I hope to see more work. Look forward to seeing the next work coming out of your studio.
Yeah, I've got some paintings that have started also based on this work, and it's connecting to the line of medicine teachings that we lost because of day schools. But that's, you know, that's coming. And then the teapot that was shown, I've got more pieces that are coming with that. But thank you very much. And thank you to the Cultural Center for hosting that exhibit in Moose Jaw. It's a nice little space. I love that little gallery. So thank you very much for inviting us in.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you, Jen and Audrey, for taking the time to do this and arrange this tonight as well. Thank you so much for sharing your stories.
Thanks, Dirk. Yeah. It's a pleasure. Yeah, if you don't, the show is still up at the Moose Jaw Cultural Center until June the 11th. And yeah, like we said, it features Joi T and Catherine Blackburn and Audrey, and really great, the works, the way they interact together. I think it's really engaging exhibit, and it's beautiful in that space. It's right down on Main Street, Moose Jaw, so down in the downtown. So that was our hope, is we love partnering with the Cultural Center because it brings our exhibitions right into you know, downtown Moose Jaw, hopefully very accessible, and people could just walk in off the street to see the work. So thanks to all of you for joining us tonight, and really appreciate you being a part of the dialogue.
Thanks again. I hope everybody has a great evening.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey.
Bye now.